Chapter 922, Zhang Yi's Confession. Ling Hu Feishua walked forward, with Zhang Yi following beside her. The members of the Rose Squad on the other side were being escorted by soldiers towards East Sea City. Along the way, many soldiers from the East Sea region gathered nearby to watch. They looked at these people curiously. After all, this was no ordinary person who had come over this time. Zhang Yi, the leader of the investigation team with the codename Chaos, was the top expert in the Jiangnan region. The Rose Squad was all women, and many of them were beautiful. Such a team was naturally eye-catching, and it attracted a lot of discussion among the soldiers in the East Sea region. "Look! I like the third one. She's got a great body." "Not me. I like the second one. She's got long legs, and she'd look sexy in stockings." "Hey, I like them all. Those two over there, are they the investigation team leaders from the Jiangnan region? It seems that the female team leader has some presence. But the male one is a bit of a slacker, not at all military-like. Very average." The soldiers were commenting on them, looking at Zhang Yi and the others like they were rare animals. A coldness flashed in Zhang Yi's eyes. As one of the largest war zones in the Huashu Kingdom, the East Sea region had strict military discipline and could not possibly allow soldiers to do such outrageous things. There was only one possibility for the current situation. Someone was deliberately humiliating them in order to suppress them and achieve their own ends. In Zhang Yi's heart, that long-lost emotion arose once again. In troubled times, only strength was the bottom line. Otherwise, no one would respect you, not even so-called allies. Behind Zhang Yi and the others, Li Tianyang watched the scene in front of him and a meaningful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The #1 expert in the Jiangnan region and the #1 beauty in the army are both arrogant people. If we don't suppress their arrogance first, they won't give up information so easily. Liang Ximiao glanced at Li Tianyang and smiled slightly. "I'm afraid that overdoing it is not a good thing, brotherly. After all, Jiangnan region and we are brothers, and we still rely on them for food and technical support. Don't take things too far." Li Tianyang snorted lightly and said disapprovingly, "If it weren't for our East Sea region deterring the sea and guarding the country's borders, where would they get to be so carefree? If you want something, you always have to pay a price. They've had too long a happy life, and it's time they learned a lesson. Besides, this time they have offended the Colombian Navy. If we hadn't helped them, they would have been sunk long ago. Even if they have grievances, they have to swallow them." Liang Ximiao just smiled, but didn't say much. Li Tianyang had always been this strong-willed character, otherwise he couldn't have become the head of the East Sea region's operations department. Zhang Yi and Ling Hu Feishua were escorted to an RV. The soldiers around them were still polite. After all, they were not enemies, so they were not really treated like prisoners. It was just that they were facing two captains, and even though Zhang Yi and Ling Hu Feishua had been injected with Compound 3, they were still very cautious. A tiger that has been injected with an anesthetic is still a tiger, and no one dares to provoke it lightly. Several cars drove into East Sea City. Zhang Yi looked out of the window at the buildings outside. It was somewhat similar to Blizzard City, but it was a bit more simple and there were no tall buildings. Instead, there were various watchtowers and fortresses everywhere in the city. Long machine gun ports extended from the tall watchtowers, aimed at the sky and the outer edge of East Sea City. This place had an added sense of solemnity compared to Blizzard City. Even the air carried a salty smell. It wasn't the sea water, but the smell of blood. Zhang Yi thought to himself, no wonder the East Sea region is so strong. It has to face many powerful forces in the Southeastern Sea all day long, and it simply cannot survive without being extremely strong. I thought the Jiangnan region was dangerous enough, but now it seems that they are still relatively safe. After a while, Zhang Yi was taken to a place to stay. Ling Hu Feishua was detained separately from him. Although it was said to be detention, the room was well equipped. The person in charge of guarding him was an imposing soldier. Although Zhang Yi did not have combat goggles to see through the strength of this person, from his iron temperament and the current situation, his strength at this time was at least at the level of Bai Li Changqing. The man said to Zhang Yi, "You can rest here for the time being. If you need anything, you can let us know at any time, and we will try our best to satisfy your needs." Although the tone was blunt, the attitude was considered polite. Zhang Yi nodded and didn't have any objections. He asked for some food and water, and then plopped down on the sofa in the living room. There was a bookshelf by the wall with a row of books on it, and Zhang Yi picked one up and started reading. Everything he did at this time was clearly visible to the eyes of the intelligence department. Liang Ximiao appeared with her men in the surveillance room of the intelligence department. Not only was Zhang Yi under surveillance here, but so were Linghu Feishue and the other female team members. However, they also had basic professionalism. For example, the members of the Rose Squad were all monitored by female staff. The camera showed that everyone's behavior was different. Linghu Feishue sat on the sofa, motionless as if she were an ice sculpture. She didn't even eat or drink the water and food they sent her. The same was true of the members of the Rose Squad. Only Zhang Yi ate and drank as if nothing was wrong. Liang Ximiao was a little surprised. What a man of nerves. I really don't know whether to say that he has a high psychological quality or that he is a master. The people from the intelligence department surveyed Zhang Yi and frowned. He doesn't even look like a professional soldier. Because professional soldiers have received special training, they won't behave like this after being captured. However, the investigation captain of the Jiangnan region is definitely a ruthless character. Not to mention that among their captains, he currently has the highest ability index in existence. Camouflage. This must be his disguise. A deep light reflected from Liang Ximiao's thick glasses. It seems that it will be difficult to get the information we want from him. Don't worry, we have plenty of time to slowly get the information out of him. Having said that, Liang Ximiao looked at a female staff member with a ponytail on his left. "Li, what happened to the people brought back from the ship?" Li Hongyu hurriedly replied, "They were all poisoned with an anesthetic alkaloid and won't wake up for a while. I've already sent them to the medical department, and the response I got was that their lives were not in danger and they would regain consciousness in 12 hours. Liang Ximiao nodded, "We need to interrogate those people one by one when they wake up. I think they may have important information." Chapter 923, He's So Scary. After Zhang Yi checked into the guest house in East Sea City, he acted as if he was staying in a hotel. He knew that the East Sea region had no grudges against him and naturally would not harm him. They just wanted information about the source of God. He had made up his mind that as long as the other party came to ask, he would give a decisive answer. He didn't want to suffer any physical pain. Zhang Yi asked himself if he was a tough guy. Besides, a real man doesn't suffer any immediate losses. As the old saying goes, life is like that, so if you can't resist, you might as well enjoy it. This laid-back mentality and way of acting left the intelligence department of the East Sea region a bit at a loss. So, they interrogated the Rose Squad first. After not getting any useful information, they began to talk to Zhang Yi in detail. That morning, the East Sea region provided Zhang Yi with a very sumptuous meal. There was no shortage of fresh seafood, which should have all been caught that day. The table was full, so Zhang Yi felt at ease eating. Zhang Yi was unceremonious, with a lobster leg in one hand and a grilled squid in the other, and his mouth was full of oil. After he had eaten and drunk his fill, someone came to clear the table. At this time, the interrogators, who had been waiting outside for a long time, glanced at each other before walking in with determined strides. Liang Ximiao had gathered all the elites of the intelligence department. They included psychology experts, micro-expression experts, language experts, and so on. The two interrogators, Li Hongyu and Chen Liang, were also the elites among the elites of the intelligence department. Under these circumstances, if Zhang Yi lied, they could easily tell. The biggest problem was that Zhang Yi refused to cooperate and would not open his mouth. If that happened, Liang Ximiao would have a headache. They had ways to get Zhang Yi to talk, but using those methods on an ally could completely damage relations with the Jiangnan region. Because of this, Liang Ximiao's expression was also extremely grave today. Li Hongyu and Chen Liang put aside their apprehensions and walked into Zhang Yi's room. "Hello, Mr. Zhang Yi. I hope you are satisfied with the meal." Li Hongyu smiled and mentioned Zhang Yi's name. However, Zhang Yi seemed to have not heard her. He answered with a smile while picking his teeth, "It's okay. The seafood here is good, better than in Tianhai City." Chen Liang put on a professional smile. "We would like to ask you some questions. We hope you can cooperate with us." After all, he had already thought of a line of argument, first lowering Zhang Yi's guard, and then slowly breaking through. Who knew that before he could finish his sentence, Zhang Yi interrupted him. "I know what you want to ask. I just want to know, information about the source of God? I'll tell you." Zhang Yi said this while still carefully cleaning his teeth, with a piece of lobster meat stuck in his teeth, which was very uncomfortable. Chen Liang's smile froze on his face. This elite agent with 12 years of experience in the intelligence department of the East Sea region had suddenly been put in a difficult position by Zhang Yi. "You're not a brother, why aren't you playing by the rules?" Chen Liang's mind was in a daze. Everything he had learned was how to get information out of people. But now that the other party had volunteered information, what had all his hard work been for? At this time, Liang Ximiao's voice came over the headset. "He's not going to confess so easily, it must be a trick. Keep pressing him." Chen Liang calmed down a little. "Ahem, it would be best if you could cooperate. We do want to get this information. Can you tell us more?" Zhang Yi spoke, and in great detail. Li Zhongyu and Zhang Weiwei had both fallen into the hands of the East Sea region. They would just have to wait until they woke up and ask them, so there was no point in hiding it. The source of God was discovered in a place called Misty Valley on Star Island. Zhang Yi said as if it was none of his business. This act of cooperation ushered in the biggest crisis in the history of the intelligence department of the East Sea region. The micro-expression expert said incredulously, "His expression is flawless. I don't see any signs of lying." Liang Ximiao's eyes widened. He looked at Zhang Yi on the monitor and said incredulously, "So he has already reached a point where he can deceive even himself? First, you have to believe the lie you have made up yourself. After saying it like that, you can deceive anyone. No wonder it was chaos. No wonder it was the top combat unit in the Jiangnan region." The psychological expert also gave his opinion. "From his words and actions, I don't see any signs of lying. He is so natural, as if he is just telling the truth." Then he put his hand on his forehead, pounded the table in pain, and said, "He is the most difficult opponent I have encountered since I started my career." Liang Ximiao's forehead was sweating. How were they going to deal with such a difficult opponent? In the crowd, a young girl in her 20s couldn't help but whisper when she saw everyone's reaction, could it be that everything he said was true? As soon as she said this, everyone's attention fell on her. There were all kinds of looks, from mockery to pity. Some shook their heads and turned their heads to laugh secretly, others looked at her with pity, as if they were looking at a child. Liang Ximiao looked at the new recruit and said with a grave face, "Lu, this is no time to joke. You have to understand, we are dealing with someone extremely powerful, the most difficult person to deal with in the Jiangnan region. What we have to do is pry information about the source of God out of him. This is an S-level mission. Do you think he'll be so stupid as to tell us everything?" Lu's face turned pale. She realized her own rashness and couldn't help but regret it. She had studied intelligence for many years, and yet she had made such a low-level mistake. She hurriedly apologized, asking her leader to forgive her for her wrong words. Liang Ximiao had no time to deal with her and continued to seriously ask Li Hongyu and Chen Liang to interrogate Zhang Yi. The two also became serious and used everything they had learned in their lives. An hour later, the two came out of Zhang Yi's room. As soon as they stepped outside, they couldn't help but weakly collapse to the ground. Chen Liang's eyes were filled with pain and despair. The interrogation techniques I have learned over the years were useless in front of him. Li Hongyu leaned against the wall, her eyes dull. Every question we asked, he answered seamlessly, without any flaws. Sure enough, a cautious person like him probably thought of everything that could happen today a long time ago. I guess he was prepared to be captured by the Colombian Navy before he responded like this. I don't know what to do anymore. Chapter 924 Truth Serum. Zhang Yi's frankness directly dumbfounded the intelligence department. Perhaps it was due to the aura around Zhang Yi, or perhaps it was because the source of God was the top priority in their hearts. So they just couldn't believe that Zhang Yi would really tell them the truth so easily. However, there was no way for them to disprove this. Because so-called intelligence itself was something in the mind. Zhang Yi, however, was like telling them that he had eaten rice for lunch today, and that was such important information. How could they believe it? How could they know that Zhang Yi had already prepared his mind long ago? Even if they were told the news about the source of God in the East Sea region, it would be difficult for them to go to Star Island to obtain it. Because there was also the blockade of the Colombian Navy in between. Secondly, the worst that could happen was that the East Sea region would swallow up the source of God all by itself. However, for Zhang Yi, he himself did not hold the idea that the source of God was something he had to obtain. It would be best if he obtained it, but if he couldn't obtain it, he could still live without it. Well, put simply, it was the word lay low. However, while Zhang Yi could lay low, there was no way this matter could be dragged on forever. The East Sea region took away the Rose Squad and Zhang Yi, and it was soon discovered by the Jiangnan region. There is no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. The big battle in the Southern Sea was too eye-catching, and it was easy to find out what had happened just by doing a little digging. Zhu Jing was the first to call Li Guangxiao and demand that he send the people back. We don't know the specific details of their conversation. But after the call, Li Guangxiao called a few important officials over. They included Chief of Staff Chu Liangxiao, Minister of Intelligence Liang Ximiao, and Minister of Operations Li Tianyan. Once everyone was present, he got straight to the point. Jiangnan region has spoken with me, and they are requesting that we return the person. We in Jiangnan region are brothers in arms, and we don't want to break our alliance and make things too awkward. So you need to find a way to find out information about the source of God. Hearing this, Liang Ximiao, the Minister of Intelligence, frowned and said, in fact, Zhang Yi has already told us where the source of God is. But for the time being, we cannot confirm the authenticity of his words. He repeated Zhang Yi's words. Star Island? Li Guangxiao knocked on the table. If the object is really there, that's going to be a bit of a problem. If it was somewhere else, at least they could send someone there to verify. But to get to Star Island, they would have to pass through the defenses of the Columbus Ocean Fleet. No kidding, they were just at each other's throats. Who would dare to go over there now? Li Guangxiao had no choice but to tell Liang Ximiao to think of something else. At most, after 3 days, if there was still no progress, they would have to send Zhang Yi and the others back to Jiangnan region. After all, the other regions were also watching. If he made a scene and damaged his reputation, he was afraid that he would leave a bad impression on the other 5 regions in the future. The East Sea region, as the main force of coastal defense, still needed a lot of help from other regions, especially support from the Jiangnan region. He couldn't push things too far. Liang Ximiao left the office with a frown. Time was running out, and he had to think of a good way to get Zhang Yi to tell the truth. But he couldn't use torture, and it would be difficult to get the information just by observation and verbal persuasion. At that moment, Chief of Staff Chu Liangxiao walked over and said with a smile, Liang, still worrying about this? Liang Ximiao smiled bitterly. How could I not be worried? After all, this is not our enemy, but someone from the Big Brother region. It is true that our hands are somewhat tied. Chu Liangxiao, however, spoke mysteriously to him, I do have a way. Follow me. Liang Ximiao looked at him in surprise, but when he saw Chu Liangxiao's determined expression, he followed him. After the two had left, Li Tianyan, the Minister of Operations, let out a cold smile at the corner of his mouth. He then gathered a few subordinates and walked towards the place where Zhang Yi was being held. What was Zhang Yi doing at the moment? He was in the East Sea region for the third day, and every day he had to answer questions from the intelligence department staff as part of his daily routine. The rest of the time, he would read books or watch old movies on TV. He was getting a little annoyed having to answer the same questions every day. He had obviously answered everything, but the other party still wouldn't let go, and it made him feel annoyed. Just as Zhang Yi was waiting in his room for the routine interrogation, the door was forcefully opened, and he saw several different faces. They were several expressionless soldiers. They walked into the room without saying a word, and then one of them put a glass of water down in front of Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi frowned. "What's the meaning of this? Are you trying to poison me?" Li Tianyang walked in from the outside, arms folded. He sat across from Zhang Yi and fixed him with his gaze. "Kill you? No. You are of no value to us dead, but you are of the greatest use to us alive." He pointed to the glass of water on the table. "Don't worry, there is no poison in this glass of water. It only has one purpose, to make you tell the truth. I admit, you have excellent professional qualities as a soldier. You even almost fooled everyone into thinking you were just an ordinary person. But," he stared at Zhang Yi and pointed at his eyes, "you can't hide from my eyes. I know you've been lying the whole time. Don't try to play these little tricks, it won't do you any good. So now, drink this glass of water. Answer all my questions obediently. If you don't cooperate, I'll have to use some methods you don't want to see." Zhang Yi fell silent. He slowly closed the book in his hands and placed it on the table. Then he stared at the glass of water, and after a few seconds, he reached out and took the glass, slowly bringing it to his mouth. Li Tianyang's mouth curled into a smile of the victor. He was a little pleased with himself. Liang Ximiao was just too cautious. If he had used a more forceful approach earlier, he would have directly obtained all the information they wanted. Why go through all this trouble? Not long after Zhang Yi drank the glass of water, his eyes became unfocused. He shook his head vigorously, as if his eyelids were weighted with 1,000 pounds, and his body fell weakly onto the sofa. Li Tianyang stared at him and slowly asked, "Zhang Yi, tell me, where's the source of God hidden?" "It's... I can't. Answer me, where's the source of God hidden?" Li Tianyang raised his voice. Zhang Yi's expression showed a painful struggle. After a long while, he said haltingly, "Somewhere between Marai and Star Island." Li Tianyang said sternly, "Then why did you say it was in the Misty Valley?" "Because Misty Valley is very dangerous, and I wanted to delay the time it took you to find it." "What exactly? Where exactly was it found?" "It was found between Marai and Star Island, in the sea. The source of God is in the sea."